At 3:58 a.m., a woman placed a call to 911 from her home in Miami. Her voice was low, controlled, careful not to carry. She said someone was inside the house. Not outside, not trying to get in, already inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no alarms triggered. Dispatch kept her on the line, asked her to move somewhere safe. She said she couldn't. A pause. Then she lowered her voice even more. She said she could hear breathing, coming from somewhere in the house. Not close enough to see, but close enough to follow her. Officers were sent immediately. Lights off, no sirens. They arrived within minutes. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. They searched every room, closets, bathrooms, the attic. Nothing, no intruder. No sign that anyone else had been there. But the call was still connected. The woman had stopped speaking. Dispatch tried to reach her. No response. Just silence. Then, something else came through the line. A sound. Faint, uneven, not static, not interference. Breathing, slow, deliberate, and still there. Long after her voice was gone. Fade and faint static, followed by distant, steady breathing. The house sat on a quiet street in Miami, a part of the city most people don't think about. No high-rises, no crowds. Just long, tree-lined roads stretching into stillness. At night, the neighborhood settled into a kind of calm that felt complete. Streetlights hummed softly. Palm leaves shifted when the wind passed through. Somewhere in the distance, a highway carried the low, steady sound of late traffic. Not loud enough to disturb anything. Just enough to remind you the world was still moving. Somewhere else. Every so often, a dog would bark. One sharp sound, then silence again. The kind of silence that fills everything. The kind people get used to. The kind people trust. This was a neighborhood where doors were sometimes left unlocked, where porch lights stayed on out of habit, not fear. People knew each other, but not deeply. A wave in the morning, a short conversation over a fence. Names remembered, routines recognized, but lives mostly kept to themselves. Nothing about the area suggested danger. Nothing about it stood out. And that was exactly why what happened here didn't make sense. The woman who made the call had lived in that house for years, long enough for the place to feel permanent. Her routines rarely changed. Lights out at the same time every night. Doors checked twice before bed. Windows locked. Even in the heat. She kept a landline phone on a small table near her bed. Not out of necessity, out of habit. Something familiar, something reliable. The house itself was older. Not abandoned. Not worn down. Just aged. It had settled into its structure over time. Wood that expanded in the heat. Floors that gave a soft creak under pressure. Now pipes that sometimes clicked behind the walls after midnight. Sounds that belonged to the house. Sounds she had learned over the years. Each one familiar, each one explainable. Nothing ever out of place. Her nights were predictable. Television off by 10. Lights dimmed shortly after. A final check of the front door. The back door. A glance through the hallway. Then bed. No visitors, no late calls, no reason for interruption. And yet, something changed that night. Not suddenly. Not in a way that would raise alarm, just small differences. Easy to ignore. The kind of things people notice, even but choose not to question. A sound where there shouldn't be one. A pause that lasts just a second too long. A feeling difficult to explain, but impossible to fully dismiss. Nothing visible, nothing clear. Just a quiet shift in something that had always felt certain. By the time she reached for the phone, she had already been listening for a while, standing still, trying to understand what she was hearing, trying to place it, because in a house where every sound had a reason, this one didn't. and in a neighborhood where nothing unusual ever happened. There was no explanation waiting outside, only the same still streets, the same quiet houses, the same distant hum of traffic moving far away. Everything exactly as it should be. Everything, except what was inside. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely changed, not because they had to, but because she preferred it that way. Mornings began early. Before the sun fully settled over the neighborhood, she was already awake. The house would still be dim, shadows resting quietly in the corners. She would move through it slowly, without turning on many lights. There was no rush, no reason to hurry. In the kitchen, the same routine waited for her. A kettle placed carefully on the stove. Water measured the same way each morning. She didn't need to check. She knew the amount by memory, the soft sound of it heating, filling the silence. Then the quiet click as it finished. Tea poured into the same cup, always the same one. She would sit by the window, not to watch anything in particular, just to look out. The street would still be mostly empty. Maybe a car passing in the distance. Maybe someone walking. Briefly, then gone. She never waved first, but if someone did, she would nod. Small acknowledgments, nothing more. The morning would pass without interruption. No sudden noises, no unexpected visitors, on just the steady movement of time, marked by familiar sounds. A clock ticking somewhere in the kitchen. Soft, consistent, easy to ignore, until you noticed it. And once you noticed it, it stayed with you. By afternoon, the house would feel warmer, the kind of warmth that settles into the walls. She would move from room to room slowly, sometimes cleaning, sometimes just adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. A chair aligned slightly differently. A curtain pulled just enough to change the light. Nothing significant, just small actions to pass the time. There were phone calls, occasionally, not often. A relative who checked in every few days. Short conversations, predictable. How are you? I'm fine. How is everything? The same. And it usually was the same. Evenings arrived quietly, no clear moment when day turned into night. Just a gradual dimming of the light outside, shadows stretching longer across the floor. She would turn on the television. Not loud, never loud, just enough to fill the space with voices. Something in the background, something to keep the silence from feeling too complete. She didn't always watch. Sometimes she would sit in the same chair, eyes half-focused, listening more than seeing. The volume never changed, always low, always controlled. As the night settled in, her routine became more precise, more deliberate. She would walk through the house, one room at a time, checking everything. The front door, locked. The back door, locked. Windows, secured. Each one tested, not once, twice. A habit formed over years, not out of fear, out of certainty. If everything was checked, then everything was fine. That was the rule. The hallway light was always left on. Not bright, just enough to soften the darkness. A constant. Something she never forgot. Something she never questioned. The rest of the house would fall into shadow. Rooms empty. Doors closed. The television turned off at the same time every night. And with it, the last consistent sound of the day. What remained was silence. A complete kind of silence. The kind that settles into every corner. Broken only by the ticking clock in the kitchen. Steady, unchanging. Proof that time was still moving, even when everything else felt still. She would lie in bed, listening to it sometimes, not intentionally. It was just there, part of the house, part of the routine, part of what made everything feel normal. Nothing about her life suggested anything unusual. Nothing about her routine left room for interruption. It was structured, predictable, safe. There was a quiet sense of isolation, but not discomfort. She was alone, but not uneasy. The house had never given her a reason to feel that way. Every sound had meaning, every movement had an explanation. Even the occasional creak of the floor, or the soft shift of pipes behind the walls, belonged to the structure she knew so well. There were no surprises, no sudden changes, just repetition. Day after day, night after night, the same lights, the same sounds, the same silence. And because everything was always the same, she knew when something wasn't. That was the difference. That was what mattered. Not the noise itself, but the fact that it didn't belong. Because in a life built on routine, it only takes one unfamiliar sound to break the feeling of safety completely. The first change was small, easy to miss, the kind of thing most people would ignore without thinking twice. It started with the phone. The landline had always been quiet. No interruptions, no late-night calls, no reason for it to make any sound unless she picked it up. But one night, as she passed by the table where it rested, she heard something, a faint click, soft, brief, so light it could have been mistaken for something else. She paused, looked at the phone for a moment, then continued on. There was no follow-up, no ringing, no voice, nothing to confirm that it had been anything at all. The next night, it happened again. This time, a little clearer. A click, followed by a short burst of static, like a line connecting, then stopping. She stood still for a second longer, listening, but the sound didn't return. By morning, it didn't seem important anymore. Just a minor disturbance. A technical fault. Maybe. Old wiring. A loose connection somewhere outside. Something explainable, something ordinary. Over the next few days, the sounds became more consistent. Not louder, not aggressive, just present. Each night, at some point, the phone would make that same quiet signal. A click, a trace of static, then silence. She began to notice it more. Not because it was alarming, but because it repeated. And repetition draws attention. One evening, she decided to check. She walked over slowly, lifted the receiver, and held it to her ear. There was no dial tone, just a low, steady static. Soft, continuous, like distant interference. She listened for a few seconds, then placed it back down. No concern, no urgency. Just a note in her mind, something to observe. The following night, she picked it up again. This time, the dial tone came through, clear, normal, exactly as it should be. Nothing unusual, and just like that, the thought passed. The house returned to what it had always been. Quiet, predictable, still. But then, a few nights later, something else changed. It was late. The house had already settled. Lights off, doors checked, the hallway light casting its usual dim glow across the floor. She was moving toward her bedroom when she noticed the door to the spare room. Slightly open, not wide, just enough to catch her attention. She stopped, looked at it for a moment. She didn't remember leaving it that way, but she also didn't remember closing it. A small detail, easy to overlook. She walked over, pushed it gently until it clicked into place, then stood there for a second longer, listening. Nothing, no movement, no sound from inside. Just the same stillness that filled the rest of the house. She turned away, continued on. That night, she slept without interruption. The next morning, everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing out of place. No sign that anything had been disturbed. By evening, the memory had already softened. Another small thing, another moment without explanation, but not enough to matter. Not yet. Days passed. Then one night, as she sat in the living room with the television playing quietly in the background, something drew her attention again. The clock, the one in the kitchen. It had always been there, always ticking, a steady, reliable sound. But now, it wasn't. She listened, waited. Nothing. The ticking had stopped. She stood up slowly, walked into the kitchen, and looked at it. The second hand wasn't moving. It had paused, mid-motion, and she watched it for a moment, still, unmoving. Then, without warning, it shifted. 1 second forward, then another, and another, back to normal. As if nothing had happened, she remained there, watching it, just a little longer than usual, then turned away. No reaction, no concern. Clock stopped sometimes, batteries weakened, mechanisms failed, then corrected themselves. There was always a reason. There had to be. That was how she understood things. Everything had a cause. Everything could be explained. That was what kept the house familiar. That was what kept it safe. Later that night, the phone made the sound again. The same click. The same brief static. But this time, it came from closer. Not across the room. Not distant. Right beside her. She turned toward it immediately. Waited. No second sound followed. Just silence. After a moment, she stepped closer, reached down, and lifted the receiver. Held it to her ear. For a second, there was nothing. Then, the line was already open. Not connecting, not dialing, just open. A soft, low presence on the other end. Not a voice, not movement, just a faint, uncontinuous sound. So quiet it almost blended into silence. She listened, still calm, still steady. Then, something within that sound shifted. A subtle change. A rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale. So faint it could have been mistaken. So slight it could have been dismissed. And that's exactly what she did. She lowered the receiver slowly, placed it back in its cradle. Stood there for a moment, then turned away. No urgency, no fear. Just another detail, waiting to be explained. The house remained quiet. The hallway light still on. The clock ticking again in the kitchen. Everything in its place. Everything unchanged, except for one thing. The line had not needed to connect. It had already been open after that night. The sounds didn't stop. They settled into a rhythm. Not random, not occasional, consistent. Each night, at nearly the same time. The phone would respond. No ringing, no warning. Just that same quiet shift in the line. A click. Then static. Always brief. Always controlled. As if something had learned exactly how much to reveal. And no more. She began to notice the timing. It wasn't exact, but it was close. Late enough for the house to be completely still. Late enough that every other sound had already faded. That was when it came. And once she recognized that, she started waiting for it. Not out of curiosity, out of certainty. Because when something repeats, it becomes expected. And when it becomes expected, it becomes harder to ignore. One night, she was already standing near the phone when it happened, watching it, waiting. The sound came, a soft click, followed by that low, steady static. She didn't reach for it immediately. She listened first. Something had changed. The static wasn't flat anymore. It carried a pattern. Subtle, uneven, almost like it was shifting in response to something. She picked up the receiver slowly, held it to her ear. The line was open again. No dial tone. Just that same quiet presence. But now, it was clearer. The sound she had dismissed before wasn't as easy to ignore. It had structure, a rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale. This time, it didn't fade. It stayed, soft, but steady. She remained still, listening, trying to separate it from the static, trying to understand it. But after a few seconds, it returned to silence. Complete silence. No disconnect, no click. Just gone. She lowered the phone again, placed it back carefully. Her movements slower now, more deliberate. That was the first time she hesitated. Not fear, not yet. Just hesitation. A moment where the routine didn't feel automatic anymore. The following night, The same pattern repeated, the same time, the same sound. But now, there was something underneath it. Faint, almost buried. A distortion within the static. Irregular, unclear, like a voice, trying to form, but never fully becoming one. She listened longer this time, long enough to be certain it wasn't just interference. It shifted, rose slightly, then dropped again. Fragments of sound, without shape, without words, but not random, never random. At the same time, other parts of the house began to change. Subtle things, small enough to question. The floor in the hallway, just outside her bedroom, started to creak. Not constantly, not loudly, just once. Each night. Always in the same spot. A single shift in the wood, as if pressure had been placed there, then released. She tested it the next morning, stepped in the same place, listened. The sound matched. But that didn't explain why it happened at night, when she wasn't there. The hallway light, and the one she always left on, began to flicker. Not enough to go out. Just a brief dimming, then back to normal. It happened without warning, sometimes once, sometimes twice, then nothing. She checked the bulb, tightened it, watched it for a while. It stayed steady, perfectly normal, until the next night. By then, her routine had started to change, not outwardly. She still followed the same steps, the same checks, the same movements through the house. But internally, something had shifted. She was listening more, pausing longer, noticing the silence instead of moving through it. Kinda when she approached the phone now, she didn't reach for it immediately. She waited, as if expecting it to react before she touched it. And sometimes, it did. One night, the sound came earlier than usual. She turned toward it, already aware. The static was there. Soft, consistent, but beneath it, something else rose. A shape within the noise. A break in the pattern. She picked up the receiver slowly, held it close, and listened. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, a sound. Faint, distorted, barely forming, but unmistakable. A voice, not clear, not complete, but structured enough to carry meaning. It stretched through the static, uneven, broken, and then it stopped. She didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. And then it came again. Softer this time, closer, a single word. Her name, not loud, not whispered, just present, as if it had always been part of the line. She pulled the receiver away slightly, looked at it, as if expecting something to change, then brought it back to her ear. Silence. Complete. Nothing left behind. No breathing, no distortion. Just an empty line. She placed it back down, slower than before. This time, she didn't walk away immediately. She stood there, waiting, but the sound didn't return. That night, she did something different. She left the receiver slightly off the hook, not fully placed down, not fully lifted, just enough to keep the line open. Then she stepped back, watched it, listened from a distance. For a while, nothing happened. The house remained still. The hallway light steady. The clock ticking in the kitchen. Everything normal. Then, the line shifted from across the room. She could hear it, faint but clear enough. A movement. Not static. Not interference. Something moving within the open line. A soft adjustment, a change in pressure, like someone repositioning, just out of reach. She stepped closer, slowly, careful not to make a sound. The moment she reached the phone, she lifted it fully. The line went silent, instantly. No delay, no fade, just gone. As if whatever had been there had stopped the moment she touched it. She remained still, listening. Nothing returned. That was when the pattern became clear. It wasn't just happening, it was responding. and whatever was on the other end of that line knew exactly when she was listening. The night it happened, nothing was visibly different. The same street outside, the same dim glow from the hallway light, the same quiet settling into the walls, but something felt heavier. Not louder, not active, just present. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. The kind that holds. She moved through her routine the same way she always did. Doors checked, windows secured, television turned off at the usual time. But each step carried a pause. Each movement slightly delayed, as if she was listening between actions, waiting for something she couldn't fully define. The clock in the kitchen continued ticking. Steady, unchanged. But now, why it stood out more. Each second landing with more weight than before. When she walked past the hallway, the floor didn't creak. That was the first difference. The space where the sound had been remained silent. And somehow, that felt worse. The light above flickered once, then steadied. She stopped beneath it, looked down the length of the hallway. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. But she didn't look away immediately. That pause had lasted longer than it should have. Eventually, she turned, walked back toward the living room. The phone sat where it always had, still, unchanged. She stood near it for a moment, not reaching for it, just aware of it. Then the sound came, not loud, not sudden. A quiet opening, the line activating without being touched. No ring, no signal, just that same subtle presence, filling the space. She didn't pick it up right away. She listened, first, from a distance. The sound was there, clearer than before, no longer buried in static, no longer shifting. Steady, controlled. Breathing, slow. Measured, consistent. She stepped closer. Her hand hovered over the receiver. Paused, then lifted it, held it to her ear. The line was already open. No dial tone, no interference. Just that same steady breathing, continuing without interruption. She didn't speak immediately. She listened, waited, as if expecting it to change. It didn't. After a few seconds, she lowered her voice. Calm, controlled, careful. She dialed 911. The connection went through. A dispatcher answered. Professional, neutral, asking what the emergency was. She spoke quietly. Said there was someone in her house. Her words were clear but restrained. Not rushed, not panicked, just certain. The dispatcher asked where. She didn't answer right away. There was a pause. A long one. She was listening again. The breathing hadn't stopped. It remained steady, present, close. The dispatcher asked if she could see the person. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that stretches. The kind that fills the space between words. She said, no. But her voice had shifted slightly. Lower, more careful. The dispatcher told her to move somewhere safe, to leave the house if she could. She didn't move, didn't respond immediately. Another pause, then quietly. She said she couldn't. The dispatcher asked why. No answer. Just the sound of her breathing. Softer now, trying not to carry, and beneath it, the other breathing, still there, unchanged, not reacting, not interrupting, just continuing. The dispatcher asked if she could hear the person. Another pause. This one shorter. She said yes, very softly. The dispatcher asked where the sound was coming from. She didn't answer. Not right away. There was a shift in the line, a slight adjustment, like movement. Too subtle to define. She inhaled, slowly, carefully, and then she spoke. It's right behind. She stopped, mid-sentence. No sudden noise, no clear interruption. Just silence. Her voice disappeared, completely. The line stayed open. The dispatcher called out to her, Asked if she could still hear them. No response. Only the open connection. Seconds passed, then longer. The dispatcher continued speaking, trying to get any kind of reply. Nothing came back. Then, something changed. A sound entered the line. Not static, not interference. Something formed. Faint at first, then clearer. Breathing, but not the same as before. This was different. More deliberate. More defined. Not matching the rhythm of a person trying to stay quiet. Not uneven, not nervous, consistent. Controlled, almost practiced. The dispatcher stopped speaking for a moment, listening, then tried again. Asked if anyone was there. The sound didn't respond. It didn't react. It didn't change. It just continued. Inhale, pause, exhale. Closer now, more present in the line than anything else. No movement in the background, no voice. No indication of where it was coming from. Just that steady, measured breathing. Filling the call. The line remained active, unbroken, open. And whatever had replaced her voice stayed on it. Officers arrived within minutes. No sirens, no lights. The street remained as it had been. Still, undisturbed. From the outside, nothing suggested anything had happened. The house looked exactly the same. Front porch, light on, curtains drawn, no movement inside. They approached the front door, knocked, announced themselves, waited, no response. The door was locked from the inside. They checked the perimeter. Windows, secured. No signs of damage, no indication that anyone had entered or left. After a brief pause, they forced entry. The door gave way cleanly. No resistance beyond the lock itself. Inside, the house was quiet. Not empty. Just still. The hallway light was on, casting the same dim glow across the floor. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. They moved through the rooms one by one, clearing each space, calling out, listening. The kitchen. Empty. The clock still ticking. Steady. Uninterrupted. The living room. Television off. Furniture exactly where it should be. No signs of struggle, no overturned objects. No indication that anything had been moved. They continued down the hallway. The floor remained silent beneath their steps. No creak. No shift. Just a flat, controlled sound. The spare room door was closed. They checked it. Empty. Closet? Clear. Nothing inside. Then the bedroom. The door was partially open. They pushed it gently. Inside, they found her. On the floor, near the bed, unconscious. No visible injuries, no signs of a fall, no indication of what had caused it. She was breathing, slow, shallow, unresponsive. The phone was still off the hook, resting beside the bed. The line, open. One of the officers stepped closer, listened briefly, then placed it back down. The call ended. Paramedics were called in. She was taken out of the house shortly after. Still unconscious. Still without explanation. No immediate cause was identified, no clear reason for her condition. The rest of the house remained unchanged. No second person was found. No trace of anyone else. No evidence suggesting an intruder had been there. Every entry point remained secured. Every lock intact. Whatever she had heard, whatever she had reported, left no physical presence behind. In the hours that followed, the 911 call was reviewed. Multiple times, carefully, each second examined, each sound isolated. The beginning of the call was clear. Her voice, calm, measured, answering questions, pausing, listening. Nothing unusual in her tone. Nothing to suggest confusion. Then the moment. Her final sentence. Cut short. No interruption detected. No external noise identified. Just silence. And then the second presence. It began immediately after she stopped speaking. Not overlapping, not gradual. A clear transition. The audio was isolated, enhanced, filtered, examined across multiple passes. The sound remained consistent, not static, not signal interference, not a crossed line. It carried structure, a defined rhythm. I'm breathing, but not matching her earlier pattern, not matching the dispatcher, not aligning with any known source within the recording. It continued for several seconds, unbroken, unaffected by the dispatcher's voice, unaffected by attempts to reestablish contact. Then it stopped, abruptly. No fade, no distortion. Just absence. The line remained open for a moment longer, then disconnected. Audio specialists reviewed the recording, more than once. Different methods, different equipment. The conclusion remained the same. The sound could not be identified. It did not match known forms of interference. It did not resemble background noise from the environment. It did not align with mechanical faults in the system. It was present, clear, structured, and unaccounted for. Inside the house, nothing explained it. No device, no secondary line, no source that could produce what had been recorded, and no evidence that anyone else had been there to create it. The report remained simple. No forced entry, no suspect, no explanation, only the call, and the seconds that followed. After her voice was gone in the months that followed, the house did not remain empty. It was listed, shown, eventually occupied again. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same quiet street, the same steady rhythm of the neighborhood. No visible reason to question anything. The new residents moved in without incident. At first, everything was normal, no disturbances, no unusual activity. Just another house, settling into routine. But not for long. The first report was minor, a phone issue, a call connecting without being dialed. No voice on the other end, just an open line. It happened once, and then again, days later, each time, brief, each time, dismissed. A technical fault. Old wiring, something within the line. It didn't last long, but it was noted. Quietly, without much concern. No further incidents were formally recorded. Nothing that required investigation. Nothing that remained long enough to be proven. And so, the house continued. Occupied, then vacant again, passing between owners, each leaving behind nothing that could be clearly explained. The original recording, however, remained, held as evidence. Reviewed, archived, restricted. Only fragments were ever released, short segments, carefully selected. The beginning of the call, her voice. Calm, measured, then silence. The part that followed was never fully made public. Those who were given access heard more than what was shared. Not details, not explanations, just the sound. Consistent, unchanging, present, and every account matched. Not in description, but in reaction. A pause, a hesitation, an uncertainty in how to explain what they had heard. No one identified it, no one traced it, no one confirmed where it came from. Only that it was there, and that it remained, after she was gone. To this day, the recording is incomplete. Only fragments were ever released, but those who have heard it all agree on one thing. The call didn't end when she disappeared. Something was still listening. Fade out, faint line static, steady, distant, then silence.